Throwaway account for obvious reasons. There's a sentence I heard years ago from a guy sitting across from me in a grim little bar with sticky tables and dead neon lights. He was drunk enough that his words dragged against each other, but one thing came out clear. A vanished insurance policy is a policy that did not save you when you needed it. At the time, I laughed because I thought he was just rambling. I remember lifting my glass and telling him that sounded like something printed on a fortune cookie for depressed accountants. Funny thing about words. Sometimes they wait years before they hit you. My name's William. I'm in my 40s now. Mortgage, thinning hair, a coffee maker I complain about every morning but never replace. To anyone looking in from the outside, I'd probably seem boring. Ordinary. But I've done things I never talk about. Not violent things, before people jump to conclusions. I never robbed banks or put guns in people's faces. I convinced myself my crimes were cleaner than that. Smarter. Less ugly. That's the lie people tell themselves. This happened 12 years ago, back when I was 32 and drowning so slowly I almost convinced myself I could breathe underwater. I was working as an insurance claims adjuster. The irony isn't lost on me. The pay looked decent on paper until life started taking bites out of it. My mother got sick. Medical bills piled up. I had credit cards that I treated like emergency life rafts until I realized they were anchors tied around my ankles. Then there was Emily. Not her real name. Emily and I had been together for years, and I had every intention of marrying her someday. I even had a ring hidden in a sock drawer. But she didn't know how bad things were getting. Every morning I'd wake up before her and check my bank account with this knot in my stomach. I started recognizing the numbers the way people recognize faces. $214. $98. $41. Then one morning, -$63. I stared at that screen forever. People imagine desperation as some dramatic movie scene where alarms go off and someone screams into the rain. Real desperation is quieter. It's sitting in your kitchen at 6:13 a.m., eating stale cereal because you don't want to waste milk, wondering how many lies you've already told and how many more you'll need tomorrow. And around that time, I noticed something at work. Something small. Something that eventually grew teeth. I'd been working claims long enough to stop seeing files as people. That sounds cold, but anyone who spends enough time pushing paperwork starts doing it. Names become case numbers. Accidents become forms. A house fire becomes a stack of photographs and signatures. My job was mostly routine: review documents, verify details, approve or deny payouts. Day after day. Boring enough that people made mistakes simply because they stopped paying attention. I started noticing a pattern. Every month there were abandoned policies, lapsed payments, paperwork errors, missing beneficiary updates, accounts stuck in administrative limbo. Policies that technically existed but somehow fell into a gray area where nobody was looking too closely. Most of them got corrected eventually. Most. I remember sitting in my cubicle one afternoon, staring at one file longer than I should have. No blinking warning lights. No dramatic music. Just a thought. A tiny, ugly thought. What happens if something disappears completely? I wish I could say I pushed the thought away immediately. I wish I could tell you I was horrified by myself. That isn't what happened. I went home that evening and kept thinking about that file. I made dinner with Emily, nodded through conversations, laughed at a joke I barely heard. But my mind kept circling back like a fly trapped against a window. Because I knew something most people didn't. Insurance systems weren't magical vaults protected by lasers and genius programmers. They were messy. Layers of old software stacked on top of older software, patched together over years by people who probably retired long ago. Human systems. Human systems have gaps. Over the next week I started checking files more carefully, not officially, just looking. Watching. Learning where things moved and who approved what. I told myself it was curiosity. People are experts at renaming their own sins. Curiosity sounds harmless. Planning doesn't. Once the idea settled in, I started treating it like a side project. That sounds insane now, but back then I separated it from reality in my head. During the day I was William the employee, at night I became William the guy. Just seeing if something was possible. I paid attention to workflows nobody else cared about. Who signed off on corrections? How long inactive files sat untouched? Which departments almost never communicated with each other? I stayed late at work more often. Emily noticed. She asked if things were getting busy, and I said, "Quarterly review stuff." I still remember saying it while tying my shoes near the apartment door. Such a stupid little lie. I barely looked at her when I said it. The worst part is how normal I felt. I wasn't sweating or shaking. I wasn't hearing some evil voice in my head. I was making notes. Actual notes. Not on company paper. I wasn't that reckless. But in a cheap notebook I kept hidden in my desk drawer at home. The notebook became my map. I wrote down timelines, approval chains, delays between departments. I learned that if certain information changed during a specific window, the system generated review flags. But if updates happened during another stage, they often blended into ordinary traffic. I'm being vague on purpose. I'm not writing a manual. Back then, though, I convinced myself I was studying a machine, nothing more. Like taking apart an old clock to see the gears move. Then I found the file. I still remember the claim number even though I've spent years trying not to. An old life insurance policy belonging to a man in his 60s. No close family listed. Paperwork inconsistencies. Payment history that bounced between active and inactive status. The kind of file people glanced at and moved on from. I stared at the screen and felt this strange warmth spread through me. Because for the first time, my thoughts changed from "could this happen?" to "I think I know how." That was the moment things crossed a line, even if I refused to admit it. Up until then I could pretend I was daydreaming. Curious. Stressed. Looking for an escape route inside my own head. But after I found that file, I started building excuses. I told myself insurance companies lost money every day and barely noticed. I told myself executives at the top made more in a month than I would see in years. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone directly. You hear people say that guilt feels heavy. Mine didn't. Not yet. Mine felt light. That's the dangerous part. Because once you stop arguing with yourself, you start negotiating instead. Just enough to fix things. Just enough to get ahead. Just once. I'd repeat those thoughts while driving to work, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Then one night Emily held up a medical bill that had arrived from my mother and asked, quietly, "William, are we okay?" I said yes. And I hated myself for how quickly that answer came out. After that conversation, the clock started ticking in my head. Emily believed me. That was the problem. She looked relieved for a second, kissed my cheek, and went back to making tea like I'd solved everything with a single word. Meanwhile, I stood there feeling like I'd just forged my own signature on something invisible. A few days later, I began preparing for real. Not dramatically. No disguises. No movie stuff. I started cleaning up my routine instead. I avoided doing anything unusual at work. I arrived at the same time every morning. Ate lunch with the same people. Took the same coffee breaks. I wanted to become background noise. I also started deleting little traces of myself, notes rewritten and destroyed, browser habits cleaned up, details moved from paper into memory. Again, I'm staying vague. What I remember most isn't the preparation itself. It was the feeling. This awful combination of nausea and excitement. Like standing on the edge of a roof and realizing part of you wants to step back. And another part wants to see what falling feels like. The day I did it started like every other Tuesday. That still bothers me. I woke up late, burned a piece of toast, complained about traffic, and spilled coffee on my shirt before leaving the apartment. I remember being irritated about stupid things while carrying around a decision that could wreck my entire life. At work, people were acting normal. Someone was complaining about weekend plans. Someone else was arguing about fantasy football. I sat there listening and thinking, none of you know what's sitting 3 feet away from you. My heart was beating hard enough that I thought people could hear it. But nobody looked at me twice. When the moment came, I remember my hand hesitating. Just for a second. 1 second. Then I did what I had spent weeks thinking about. No alarms. No dramatic interruption. No security guards running down hallways. Just a few clicks, a few routine motions, and then the world kept moving as if nothing had happened at all. That scared me more than anything. For about 10 minutes afterward, I felt absolutely nothing. Seriously. I sat there staring at my monitor, expecting panic or relief or some giant emotional wave to crash into me. Nothing. I answered emails. Took a phone call. Even laughed when a coworker made some stupid joke about the office printer trying to destroy civilization. Then the adrenaline hit. Hard. My hands started shaking under the desk. I kept rubbing my palms against my pants because they felt wet. Every sound around me suddenly seemed too loud. Footsteps behind me? I nearly jumped. Someone saying, "Hey, William?" My stomach dropped. I became convinced every person walking by knew. That's the strange thing about crossing a line. Before you do it, you imagine becoming smarter or stronger afterward. I felt smaller. Paranoid. Like I'd walked into a room carrying a secret that was glowing through my skin. When lunch came, I couldn't eat. I just sat outside the building staring at traffic and thinking. Okay. Now what? The answer to now what? Arrived faster than I expected. 3 days later I was in the office when I heard 2 people from another department talking near the copier. Not whispering. Just talking. One of them said something like, "That file is weird." I froze. I didn't even turn around. I just sat there staring at my screen while every muscle in my body locked up. Weird. Such a harmless word. But suddenly my brain started sprinting. They found it. They know. You're finished. Then I heard the rest. Apparently they were discussing an unrelated claim involving duplicate paperwork. I remember this wave of relief hitting me so hard I almost laughed. Almost. Instead I sat there smiling at my monitor like an idiot. But something had changed. Before that moment I was afraid of getting caught. After that moment I became afraid of everything. Every phone call from management. Every unexpected email. Every "Can I talk to you for a minute?" sounded like a prison door opening. A week passed. Then another. Nothing happened. No meetings. No investigations. No hand on my shoulder telling me to come with someone to a conference room. Outwardly, life kept moving. I paid overdue bills. I slept a little easier. I even caught myself humming one morning while making coffee. That realization hit me like a slap. Because I had started adapting. Humans adapt to almost anything. That's one of our best qualities and one of our worst. Emily noticed I seemed lighter. She asked if work stress was finally easing up. I said, "Yeah, I think things are turning around." Again, another lie. Easy. Fast. Practiced. Then one evening I got home and found her sitting at the kitchen table with my mother's latest medical paperwork spread out in front of her. She smiled at me and said, "I don't know how you're holding everything together, but I'm proud of you." Proud. Out of every word in the English language, that one hurt the most. People think guilt arrives like lightning. For me, it showed up in pieces. I started waking up around 3 in the morning for no reason. I'd stare at the ceiling while Emily slept beside me and feel this pressure sitting on my chest. Not panic exactly. More like a constant weight. At work I began rereading ordinary emails 3 or 4 times before sending them. I worried that I sounded strange. Worried I looked nervous. Worried that worrying made me look guilty. Nobody treated me differently. That was almost worse. Then the unforeseen part finally arrived. I got called into my manager's office. No warning. Just an email asking me to stop by. I remember walking down that hallway and feeling cold all over. My mouth had gone dry. My heartbeat felt slow and heavy, like each thump had to force its way through my ribs. I sat down across from him and prepared for my life to explode. Then he smiled and said corporate was doing an internal audit. Routine procedure. Routine. I nearly threw up. I nodded through the meeting like a malfunctioning robot. Internal audit. Routine procedure. People around me acted like it was nothing. My manager kept talking about timelines and document reviews and compliance updates while I sat there hearing maybe one word out of every 10. I remember focusing on a coffee stain on his desk because I needed something small and stupid to keep me from coming apart. The rest of that day felt unreal. I walked through the office and watched everyone moving around normally, carrying folders, laughing, answering phones. Meanwhile, my brain had already skipped ahead weeks. I imagined security waiting for me at the entrance. I imagined Emily getting a call. I imagined my mother finding out. Your mind becomes cruel when fear takes over. It starts producing entire disasters and making you live through every one of them. For days afterward, I barely slept. I started snapping at people. Emily asked if I was okay, and I said work was stressful. Then she touched my arm and asked, very quietly, "William, what are you so scared of?" I had no answer. Not one I could say aloud. The audit lasted nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of feeling like I was standing under a suspended piano, waiting for the cables to snap. Every morning I walked into work expecting the end. And then, nothing. The review moved through departments, generated complaints, created extra paperwork, annoyed everyone equally. People grumbled about wasted time and endless checklists. Then eventually it ended. Just ended. No confrontation. No accusations. No office meeting where someone slid a folder across a table and asked me if I had something to explain. I got away with it. At least that's what I told myself. Because I learned something afterward. Getting away with something doesn't always feel like winning. I should have felt relieved, right? Instead, I felt hollow. Like I'd spent months sprinting away from a monster and then turned around to discover it had followed me home. I started seeing myself differently. Not as a good person who made a bad choice. Just a person whose price had finally been revealed. So that's the story. No handcuffs. No dramatic courtroom scene. No detective connecting red strings on a wall. I was never caught. At least not officially. But I don't think people understand something about crimes like this. Sometimes the punishment arrives in places nobody else can see. Years later, I still remember details I wish I could forget. The sound of office phones ringing that day. The feeling of sweat in my palms. Emily saying she was proud of me. That one still stays with me. And I think back to that drunk guy in the bar and his strange sentence. A vanished insurance policy is a policy that did not save you when you needed it. I finally understand what he meant. I thought I was stealing security. I thought I was buying peace. Instead, I traded pieces of myself for temporary relief. If anyone reading this is standing at the edge of a decision because you're desperate, angry, buried in debt, whatever, understand something. The first thing you steal is rarely money. Usually it's the version of yourself you expected to remain.